Writing a book, and I told him I would love to edit it,
That one?
and it's out. So if you haven't got this book, A Life Outside My Father's Shadow, it's fascinating. It had, so Fritz is going to tell you all about it. I don't want to spoil anything. He's got some photos to show too.
Okay. This.
And so here he is, Fritz Schwalm.
All right.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Well, I think I don't need an introduction since I've been, I think Jay and Joe are the only members who have been members of this club longer than I have. So I could basically introduce everybody if I remember. Betty gave a brief information on how this whole thing came about, and so I will tell you briefly what's in the book. 20 minutes is not enough to really give a good review, but I can give you some highlights. Basically, there are two books. The first one is a diary that my father wrote while he was in detention after the war. And I briefly talk about him. Well, actually, it takes the major part of the book. The second part is a collection of thoughts that I had written up in different essays over the years, thinking about my life experiences. It's not a biography in the sense of a chronological accounting of where I was and what I did, although that's part of the first chapter. And I'll briefly talk about each one of those. But first of all, I want to thank Betty for encouraging and supporting me in this whole endeavor. I think it's been about, 3 years that we worked on it? Yeah. And we had several revisions. We had several ideas about how to organize it, and the title is actually her idea, because she saw that in those two lives that are become apparent in these two portions, there is a tremendous transition in political and historical changes that I was hoping to reflect in this book, especially from a German perspective, or from a perspective of a German who has lived in other countries and has reflected on Germany as well as what is going on in other countries, including in my host country, the United States. The diary begins 6 months after my dad gave himself up to the British occupation army. The British and American allies had agreed to divide Germany, or actually occupy Germany, with their armies, and northern Germany was occupied by the British. So it became the British zone until Germany got united. All three zones got united in 1948 into what is now the German Federal Republic, the western part. I lived in the American occupied zone, and I described that occupation in my own portion of the book. My father gave himself up a month after the armistice, assuming that he had no guilt feelings and he had no guilt about his involvement in the National Socialist government. He had been an SS officer, joined the SS because he had been an anthropologist and they needed people who could help decide who would qualify for the SS by racial characteristics. You may say today this is terrible, but 1936 racism was present everywhere. I am sure you are aware of the situation in 1936 and even up to much later in this country. So it wasn't that uncommon. The racism of the National Socialist movement was, we now say, misguided by the notion that the Aryan race is superior to anything else. It is ridiculous. I'm a biologist, so from my point of view, it is silly and scientifically wrong to base superiority on biological characteristics. But we cannot judge in retrospect what our ancestors were doing. That means I personally don't have any guilt feelings about what happened. The next generation in Germany has much more guilt feelings about what their grandfathers did. Because again, they don't see the political context. I grew up in that context, and I show that in my writings. I would have become a dedicated National Socialist if the system would have continued. I was looking forward to becoming Hitler Youth. They were wonderfully equipped. They did what Boy Scouts do in this country. So I see how youth can be guided into an ideological system, especially when there is no communication, because there was radio, but it was pretty much controlled. All press was controlled. There was no television, there was no internet, so we did not know anything different. So that's part of an overall idea that I hope to convey. The camp life itself now, he describes the general conditions and to just give an idea of how confined and difficult the times were, the first communication that he received and that he was allowed to give was in December of 1945. He surrendered on the 2nd of June. The war was over on the 9th of May. He was allowed to write a postcard, or send a postcard to his family in December. And I'm giving a brief quote from that occasion. I'm trying I will not read much from the book, but I just want to see that what it looks like in the translation.
What page is that, Fritz?
Sorry?
It's George back here.
What page are you on?
What page?
This is page 15 in the middle. First official communication with the family. It is still cold, but I had to write today anyway. One postcard, INF, probably information. He has a lot of abbreviations that I had to explain or try to explain. One entry into the, one postcard each to Liesel. He refers to his wife by different, either as Mutti or Liesel. Mutti is the endurement term for mother. and to his mother-in-law. We were not allowed to write anything except the prescribed text. I am in British captivity, I'm doing well. That's the postcard we received at Christmas. He then moves on, and while in 1946 the Nuremberg trials were established, throughout the different occupied areas, witnesses were sought for the Nuremberg trials. And he found out that his superior in the office that he had worked had been indicted, and he volunteered to stand witness in the Nuremberg trial. It was questionable that whether they would allow an SS officer to stand witness for other SS members, but eventually he was summoned and he was transported to Nuremberg. And it's a wonderful description how he describes the conditions of Germany, German highways, in 1946. The trip from Hamburg, where his camp is located, to Nuremberg, which is about 400 miles, took 3 days. The British transport was sometimes not allowed to stay overnight in American captivity. They had to go to German police quarters to accommodate the prisoners, which was wonderful because they were allowed to make phone calls, which they might not have had the opportunity to do in American camps. They also got beer, which to him was, as much a joy as I would have had, because after a long dry spell, it's a wonderful refreshment. I don't mind questions.
Hey Fritz, I have a question. So, and your family, all those months you didn't hear from him, did you think that he may be dead, or?
We had no idea. We had some times we had, I'm discarding part of that in my part. At times my mother had a rumor that he was in an East German prison camp, in a Russian camp. She hitchhiked over there. She crossed the border, which was illegal, but she was hiding on a hay wagon of farmers that had farms on both sides of the East German border, and they were still allowed to farm on the West German side. She was hiding as a farmer's wife. She put on guard to be not recognized. She found out he wasn't in that camp. So yes, we were very anxious, and there was no communication. We had no idea. We had visitors. People had thought they had heard of him somewhere, but we did not know until Christmas. This was truly the first time we knew where he was. When he arrived in Nuremberg, he describes the conditions. He found out that he would be indicted because he was a ranking officer in that office, and the Americans had established a separate trial. They were called tribunals. They were different from the international Nuremberg trial. There were 12 tribunals. There's more detail about that in the book. There were different portions of the German government or German industry were indicted. So there were different tribunals, and each one was sentenced separately. So the cook on the industrial trial was a big one. the medical profession, the doctor's trial, lawyers. So his race and settlement office in Berlin, they were under indictment. He was transported back to the camp, and as he spent time in the camp, he caught the attention of the administration. The camp, by the way, had about 6,000 people that were interned, and the internment camps in Germany at that time collected almost anybody who had any function in the German government, or in the police, or in any of the civil administration. So they were all interns, and they were supposed to be denazified. You need to look that up, what denazification is. They were going to be cleared of their convictions of their ideology. Now think of that, okay? You want to clear somebody of their conviction. You put them in a camp and you say you're going to be imprisoned until, or you're going to be fined unless you give this up, or you're going to be fined, and many of them were fined eventually and still didn't give it up. So you cannot brainwash people after they have had a conviction. Well, that was the idea that the Allied had under Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill reluctantly agreed to that. He was the only one who really had misgivings about Stalin's involvement in all of these communications. Because of his call to Nuremberg, he came back to the camp, and he earned the trust of the camp administration to identify people who really had no involvement and no participation of any criminal notion in the government, because the British wanted to release those people. They didn't want to be responsible for thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in internment camps. So he became called a specialist to help identify people who could be released quickly. And he spends much time writing about that and how you had to earn the trust of the inmates as well, because he was cooperating with the British administration. So, but he writes about how there was some grumbling about his involvement, but how he earned the trust of that also. I will abbreviate this portion. I will just say he eventually got indicted. His office, the trial ended in 1948. He was got the lowest sentence of 10 years in prison, and he was then transported to the American criminal law prison. I'll quickly show the three prisons that he was in. If you show the next few slides. This is the camp where he was first interned. It had been a concentration camp. It had been a German prison, concentration camp under the Nazis, had become this internment camp under the British and was dissolved in 1951. The next one shows the Nuremberg Palace of Justice, where the trials took place and where he spent two periods. And then he was eventually imprisoned. And I have not visited in that prison, but the next one, the camp where he spent 5 years, the the 2 years between 1948 and 51, that was in southern Germany, in Landsberg. That's a criminal war prison. It was an old police prison in Bavaria and became a criminal war prison until 1951. I'm switching to, he was released in 1951 and he returned to his family when I was 15. So you can see my relationship to my father was a distant one because I had matured. I was the oldest of 4 siblings and took much of the responsibilities that my mother entrusted me with while my father was gone. So my relationship with him was that of an adult. And so we never really had personal issues or that he felt he needed to dominate me or play a very strict father. I probably was doing pretty well and didn't need to have any real corrections, but I don't know. I don't want to brag because as a student in school, you do a lot of stuff that would need corrections. Sorry, you're not supposed to do that. But I did. And, the German reaction to the trials was mixed. They were based on law that was different from German law. One of the major points under which my father was indicted was a member of a criminal association or criminal organization. The SS was declared a criminal organization. That was a law that the United States had established against the Ku Klux Klan, but that law did not exist in German law. So Germans said, well, it's the law of the victor, and we may have our own opinion. So he was not considered previously, what do you call it in this country, with a criminal conviction in your past. So that he would still qualify for certain things that otherwise you might be prevented if you are a previous convict. The critical part was that he was getting a major law to start a business later on. Growing up, was sheltered. We lived in a small town. We never experienced real bombing. We experienced the occupation, and I experienced it very closely because our house was at the road where the army marched in on Easter 1945. And we saw the tanks coming around the corner, about 300 yards away. We went to the cellar, but we could look out the cellar. We saw them rolling by the house, and everything was peaceful. The army marched, you can hardly believe it, but it marched about 40 miles on that particular day. It was one of the largest advances in one day and they had prepared very well. They had leaflets in the different cities that said if you resist, we'll just roll over your town and you'll be gone. There were a few fanatic Hitler Youth boys that had bazookas. They did not survive. Obviously, how do you fight tanks coming through?
So, Fritz, where's your mother at this time?
She was with the family. Yeah. My mother had to, she had to, we still received until the end of the war an officer's salary. After the war, I do not know how we survived financially for the first 3 years until my mother was employed. But that's a good point, and I can say that, or bring this up. Because of my mother having joined the National Socialist Party early in her life, in 1932, before they even were in power, she was not allowed to work as a teacher. She was a trained home economics teacher. They had a short of teachers, obviously no men were around, but she was not allowed to work because of her political history. She had to be denazified before she could come into public service again. So the best income we had was from her crafts. She was a good craftswoman, and she became known among the occupation army for the sweaters that she was knitting. She knitted beautiful Norwegian sweaters. I don't know if you're familiar with the Norwegian towers. And they paid in cigarettes. And cigarettes were the hard currency. The Reichsmark was useless. You could buy stuff that you could buy on ration marks, cards, but a lot of stuff wasn't available unless you went to the black market. In the black market, you needed good currency. But the best currency was cigarettes. One cigarette was worth 6 Reichsmark. One pack of Lucky Strike, 20 cigarettes. That's the first one I remember, Lucky Strike. You don't remember that anymore because you don't smoke anymore. So, but the one pack would get you a 4-pound loaf of bread. If we had 4-pound loaves of sourdough bread, there was a very common way to ship bread. That's just one of the signs.
Yeah, that was still going on in '56 in Bavaria. You could get almost anything with a pack of cigarettes.
56?
56, yeah.
Oh, the loaves, you mean? Oh yes, oh yeah, we still do it. You can
Almost
still,
anything with a pack of cigarettes.
you can get a 10-pound loaf at Kubi's in Dallas.
Fritz,
No, that's a common way, and sourdough bread freezes very well. So.
Fritz, when they paid your mom with cigarettes, what did she do with those cigarettes?
You pay in cigarettes.
I know.
Yeah, you give them the 20 pack of cigarettes for.
So she could get food with those.
Yeah. That's the only thing. She may have had some public support. I do not know. I know that friends advised her, but there were other ways. There were other ways to support ourselves. We went out cleaning potatoes, cleaning corn after the harvest. We were allowed to go on any field and collect. We collected beech nuts, which are rich in oil, and there were oil mills where you could bring in several pounds of beech nuts, and you would get oil for it. We would get sunflower oil. There's an interesting story. We had one of the when the occupation army camped in our backyard. One of the soldiers had come into the house and went into the cellar, and one of the family was in the cellar trying to get some potato or something, and so the soldier was looking for something to drink, or obviously wine or beer or liquor. So there was a bottle of sunflower oil on the shelf, and it was just yellow and no label. So he grabbed it and thought it was liquor. He opened it, and guess what? Spit out the oil. So he left. Our experience with the American occupation army was very It's very simple. And for a boy, interesting. I know I'm running out of time, but I want to alert you to a chapter that follows in which I describe this opposite experience that my wife had in Berlin when they were occupied by the Russians. And I can't go into the details because we are really running out of time. But in my own part, I'm describing part of, first of all, of the origin of the family, because I think there is a lot of truth that we have genetic traits that come through our ancestors. But it's also interesting to see how families come out of agriculture, go into trades, and eventually go into academic positions or other positions in the society. But the German society for a long time was very rigidly organized into peasants, workers, bourgeoisie, Bürgerschaft, trade, and you kept your trade in the family. Part of my grandfather's story shows how he was forced by his father to become a shoemaker, but he was much more interested in learning more about the world. So
Hey, Fritz.
yes, sir.
What was the hardest part of your book to write for you as an author? I mean, what did you have to really come to grips with, think about, and ponder? What's the hardest part?
The hardest part was, it's called Gretchen's Query, and that's taken from the German literature.
Yes.
It's a story with Goethe, who is our greatest author, like Shakespeare in England. He wrote the Faust story, where a scientist makes a pact with the devil to learn everything. And so in his encounter with the girl that he had seduced, she's asking him about his religion. And so that's the hardest part. Thanks. I have other reflections, and I'm really running out of time, but I know I could have talked about this for hours, and I have many more things prepared. But the formative events that shaped my convictions were gained through travel in different countries. I lived in Sweden for a year, I lived in South Africa for 2 years, and I've lived in this country now for over 50 years. So I'm here as a result of this life, and I'm very thankful for the freedom that I have had, making my own decisions.
I love you, Fritz.